Folik no wait, Tanya Okafor was not supposed to be here. She checked the address on her phone one more time, standing outside a gate so tall and so heavily fortified it looked less like a family home and more like something you'd see in a documentary about billionaires who were also, possibly, slightly unhinged. Okay, she muttered to herself, adjusting the strap of her tote bag. Either this is the world's most extra-rich family, or I made a horrible, horrible mistake accepting this job over the phone at 11 p.m. After 3 glasses of wine. She had, in fact, made several mistakes that night, mistake number 1 being 3 glasses of wine on a work night. Mistake number 2 being answering an unknown number at 11 p.m. And mistake number 3, the big one, agreeing to a same-week nanny position for a very private family, excellent pay, immediate start without asking a single follow-up question. Because the pay had been so absurdly generous, she'd assumed she misheard it and was too embarrassed to ask them to repeat it. She had not misheard it. She pressed the buzzer. A voice crackled through, clipped and formal. Name and purpose. Tanya Okafor? I'm here for the nanny position. Agency sent me. A long pause. Then the gate buzzed open. The walk up the driveway did not help settle her nerves. Neither did the 2 enormous men in black suits standing on either side of the front door, who nodded at her with the particular blank, unreadable expression of men who were either extremely well-trained butlers or extremely well-trained something else entirely. They probably just take security real seriously, Tanya said to herself, mostly to drown out the small, persistent voice in her head screaming that this was, in fact, not normal. Rich people be like that. My cousin's boss has a doorman who checks IDs. This is just doorman energy, but bigger. She was led into a sprawling foyer by a stone-faced woman in a sharp gray suit, who introduced herself only as Miss Yoon, head of staff, and walked so briskly Tanya had to jog slightly to keep up. You'll be watching Ariam, Miss, Yoon said, not looking back. 6 years old. Mr. Kwan requires absolute discretion regarding all household matters. You do not discuss anything you see or hear here with anyone outside these walls. Are we clear? Crystal, Tanya said, nodding vigorously, privately thinking, okay, so, rich people NDAs. Got it. My cousin signed one of these for a reality TV internship. This tracks. They passed a room where 2 more suited men stood over a table covered in what looked, from a quick glance, suspiciously like a large map with little red pins stuck all over it. Probably planning a family vacation, Tanya reasoned internally. Rich people do that. Big fancy vacation planning rooms. Love that for them. They passed another room where a man was speaking urgently into a phone in rapid Korean, the words shipment and compromise the only ones Tanya could partially make out. Import-export business, probably, she told herself. My uncle does shipping. Very stressful industry, lots of yelling about boats. Finally, Miss Yoon stopped outside a set of double doors, knocking once before pushing them open. Inside, at a massive desk, sat the most intimidating man Tanya had ever seen in her entire life, sharp-jawed, dressed head to toe in black. A look on his face that could curdle milk, currently aimed at a phone he was gripping so tightly, Tanya was mildly concerned for the phone's structural integrity. Mr. Kwan, Miss Yoon said, the new nanny. Kwon Ji-hoon looked up, and for just a moment, something in his stern expression flickered surprise, maybe, or something close to it, before smoothing back into careful neutrality. You're late, he said. Traffic, Tanya said automatically, which was true, though the actual truth was she'd also stopped for a celebratory latte because she genuinely not expected to get this job, and now deeply regretted having only one hand free for the handshake she was about to attempt. He didn't shake her hand. He simply studied her for a long, unreadable moment. The way Tanya would later reflect a man might study a math problem he wasn't entirely sure how to solve. Ariam is upstairs, he said finally. She's particular. I hope the agency explained the required level of vigilance this position demands. Oh, for sure, Tanya said confidently, thinking, strict rich kid parenting standards, got it. No iPad time, probably organic snacks only. I can handle a picky 6-year-old. I basically raised my little cousins. I've got this, Mr. Kwan. Don't you worry about a thing. She had absolutely no idea that the required level of vigilance referred to a full-time, round-the-clock security detail, a panic room disguised as a reading nook, and a very real, very active threat from a rival organization that meant Ariam Kwan had not, in fact, left this property without 4 armed guards in over a year. She smiled brightly. I'm great with kids, sir, truly, nothing rattles me. Something in Ji-hoon's exhausted, wary expression shifted very slightly the beginning, though he wouldn't have admitted it, of something dangerously close to relief. He had absolutely no idea, watching this cheerful, oblivious woman confidently agree to a job she fundamentally did not understand, that she was about to become the single most unpredictable variable his extremely careful, extremely controlled world had encountered in years. Welcome back, everyone. If you're new here, I am so glad you found this one, because I promise you, this story is different from anything I've told you before. Drop your city or country below. I always love seeing where this community's watching from. Now, fair warning, this one is genuinely funny. Tanya has absolutely no idea what she just walked into, and watching her figure it out is going to be a ride. But stick around, because underneath all the chaos, this one gets surprisingly sweet by the end. Subscribe now if you don't want to miss it. Okay, let's go upstairs and meet Ariam. Ariam Kwan was sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by an alarming number of stuffed animals arranged in what appeared to be a strict, deliberate hierarchy, when Tanya walked in. Hi, Tanya said, crouching down to the little girl's level with the easy warmth of someone who'd spent years wrangling younger cousins at every family gathering. I'm Tanya. I'm going to be hanging out with you for a while. What's going on here? Is this a stuffed animal court system? Ariam studied her with the particular suspicious intensity 6-year-olds reserve for new adults. This is my security detail, she said matter-of-factly. The bear is in charge. He's very serious. Right, Tanya said slowly. Deciding this was simply an extremely imaginative child with a very active pretend play life. Very important work, bear security. I respect that. Do you know how to do a perimeter check? Ariam asked. A what now? A perimeter check, Ariam repeated, like Tanya was slightly slow. Uncle Deok-gu does one every night before bed. He checks all the windows and doors. That's, very safety-conscious of Uncle Deok-gu, Tanya said, filing this away under quirky rich family tradition, possibly inspired by a home security commercial. You know what? Let's talk about something more fun. Do you like coloring? I brought crayons. This, it turned out, was the correct move, and within 20 minutes, Tanya and Ariam were sprawled on the floor together, deep in a coloring project that Ariam insisted needed to include, very specifically, a big wall, and guards, and a moat, but a friendly moat. A friendly moat, Tanya repeated, delighted despite herself. I love that for you, baby. Very cozy defensive architecture. Their peaceful coloring session was interrupted by a knock at the door. Miss Yoon, expression as unreadable as ever. Miss Okafor, Miss Kwan requests you join him for a briefing on household protocols. A briefing, Tanya said, standing and brushing crayon dust off her jeans. Very formal. Love it. I'll be right back, baby, she added to Ariam, who nodded solemnly and returned to color-coding her stuffed animal hierarchy. The briefing, it turned out, took place in Ji-hoon's office, where he sat behind his massive desk looking, if possible, even more tense than he had an hour earlier. Miss Okafor, he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. I want to review some ground rules. Ariam does not leave the property without prior approval and full escort. All visitors to the house must be cleared through Miss Yoon in advance. You do not answer the door yourself under any circumstances. And if anyone unfamiliar approaches Ariam at any point, in any context, you contact security immediately. Tanya nodded along, taking mental notes, privately reflecting that this all sounded slightly extreme even for wealthy people paranoia. But hey, different strokes. And the pay really was very good. Got it, she said. No unauthorized visitors, no unescorted outings, stranger danger protocol at DEFCON 1. Understood, sir. Something flickered across Ji-hoon's face. Was that amusement? Before smoothing away again. There's one more thing, he said. There may, occasionally, be men in the house you don't recognize. Business associates. If you encounter them, please do not engage them directly. Simply excuse yourself and Ariam from the room. Business associates, Tanya repeated. Got it. Very serious import-export energy. I'll just, politely nod and remove myself and the child from any boring business meetings. Easy, yes, Ji-hoon said slowly, watching her with an expression Tanya couldn't quite read. Exactly that. He was quiet for a moment, studying her with what Tanya was beginning to recognize as his default expression, intense, assessing, like he was constantly running calculations she wasn't privy to. Can I ask you something? He said finally. The agency that placed you here, did they explain, in detail, the nature of my work? Import-export, right? Tanya said confidently. Shipping logistics? My uncle's in a similar field. I know it can get stressful, all those boats, all that paperwork. Ji-hoon opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Something like that, he said finally. From the doorway, unnoticed by either of them, Miss Yoon watched this entire exchange with the particular controlled expression of a woman who had worked for the Kwon organization for 11 years and had genuinely never once seen her employer look this thoroughly, helplessly bewildered by another human being. Later that evening, once Ariam had been fed, bathed, and tucked into bed with an elaborate goodnight routine that involved saying goodnight to each stuffed animal individually in order of rank, Tanya found herself in the kitchen, raiding the impressively stocked fridge for a late-night snack, when Deok-gu, one of the suited men from earlier, now looking considerably less intimidating in a rumpled cardigan, wandered in. You're the new nanny, he said, eyeing her with open curiosity. Tanya, she said, extending a hand. You must be Uncle Deok-gu. Ariam told me about your perimeter checks. Very thorough. Deok-gu's expression shifted through several stages of confusion before settling into something like resigned amusement. Right, he said slowly. The perimeter checks. So what exactly do you do here? Tanya asked conversationally, pulling out leftover containers. I'm getting mixed signals. Import-export, security, but also apparently everyone does perimeter checks. Very cross-functional team. Deok-gu opened his mouth, and Tanya watched with mild confusion, as he seemed to have some kind of internal debate before finally saying, carefully, it's complicated, best not to think about it too hard. Rich people problems, Tanya said sagely, nodding like this explained everything. Say no more. I once worked for a family whose entire household ran on a color-coded chore wheel that required a laminated key. Every wealthy household has its quirks. Deok-gu stared at her for a long moment, something between disbelief and genuine, helpless laughter behind his eyes. Sure, he said finally. Quirks, that's exactly what this is. He left the kitchen quickly, and Tanya heard him, faintly, from down the hallway, apparently unable to fully contain himself, laughing so hard he had to lean against the wall. She had no idea why. But she shrugged it off, finished her snack, and went to bed in the guest room they'd assigned her, thoroughly unaware that 3 floors below, Kwon Ji-hoon was sitting in his office at midnight, staring at a security file on Tanya Okafor that Hae-won had insisted on running as standard protocol and finding himself, for reasons he couldn't fully explain even to himself, smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. The next morning brought Tanya's first real test and, unbeknownst to her, Ji-hoon's first genuine crisis of the week that had absolutely nothing to do with rival organizations, shipping disputes, or anything remotely related to his actual business. It started with a man in a suit ringing the doorbell. Tanya, under strict instructions never to answer the door, peered through the side window instead, spotted a well-dressed stranger standing on the porch, and following her employer's very clear directive about unauthorized visitors, did the sensible thing. She grabbed Ariam, hustled her into the pantry, and called security. There's a man at the door, she whispered urgently into the house phone, crouched behind a shelf of imported crackers with Ariam tucked protectively against her side. Tall, suit, briefcase. He rang the bell twice. I did not answer. Per protocol. 3 suited men arrived within 90 seconds, moving with the brisk, coordinated efficiency of people who took doorbell rings extremely seriously, which, to be fair, they did, though not for the reason Tanya assumed. The man at the door turned out to be a delivery driver from a high-end catering company, dropping off ingredients for that evening's dinner, mildly alarmed to find himself suddenly surrounded by 3 large men in dark suits demanding identification. I just have the salmon, he said, holding up a cooler bag like a peace offering. For the Quan order, I ring the bell, someone usually just takes the bag. Jihoon arrived on the scene moments later, taking the salmon delivery driver. The 3 security personnel standing at full alert, and Tanya emerging from the pantry with Ariam still clutched protectively against her hip, both of them looking deeply serious about the whole ordeal. Miss Okafor, Jihoon said slowly. What happened here? Unauthorized visitor at the door, Tanya reported, straightening with the crisp confidence of someone who'd followed protocol to the letter. I did not engage. I secured the child and alerted security immediately, exactly as instructed. Jihoon looked at the salmon. He looked at the delivery driver, who was now looking deeply confused about whether he still had a job. He looked back at Tanya. Something in his composed expression cracked, just slightly the corner of his mouth, twitching in a way that suggested he was fighting, quite hard, against something dangerously close to a laugh. That, he said carefully, was the caterer. Oh, Tanya said. Then, recovering quickly, well, better safe than sorry. You did say unauthorized visitors. He wasn't cleared through Miss Yoon. He's been delivering our catering orders for 2 years, Jihoon said. Nobody told me that, Tanya said, entirely unbothered, already ushering Ariam out of the pantry. I'm new. I follow the rules I'm given, sir. This household clearly takes security very seriously, and I respect that, so I matched the energy. Jihoon stared at her for a long moment, and Tanya watched, fascinated, as the man visibly lost the battle against his own composure, laughing a real, genuine, startled laugh, the kind that transformed his entire severe face into something almost unrecognizable. I apologize, he said, still fighting the laughter, waving the confused caterer inside with an apologetic gesture. You're not wrong to be cautious. I appreciate the thoroughness. Ariam thought it was very exciting, Tanya added helpfully. She wants to know if we get a medal. We do not currently have a medal system, Jihoon said, but I'll take it under consideration. Later that afternoon, having recovered from the great salmon incident, Tanya found herself walking through the garden with Ariam, who was giving her a very detailed tour of what she called the safe spots, a treehouse, with reinforced walls that Ariam insisted was just for playing, a hidden nook behind the hedges that was just a good hiding spot for hide and seek, and a panic room disguised as a reading nook that Ariam described as the cozy library, but you can't tell anyone where the door is. Very imaginative game, Tanya said, delighted, mentally filing all of this under elaborate hide-and-seek tradition. This family is really committed to their bits. They were interrupted by the arrival of a sleek black car, from which emerged a woman Tanya didn't recognize, polished, sharp-featured, radiating the particular confident energy of someone used to being important. Ariam. The woman called out, waving, "There's my favorite girl." Ariam's entire demeanor shifted instantly, her earlier playful energy replaced by something guarded, almost wary. "Hi, Aunt Ji-yeon," she said, her voice noticeably flatter than it had been moments earlier. Tanya, sensing something off, positioned herself slightly between Ariam and the approaching woman, her nanny instincts kicking in even without fully understanding why. "And who's this?" Ji-yeon asked, looking Tanya over with an expression that managed to be both dismissive and calculating at once. "Tanya, new nanny," Tanya said, extending a hand that Ji-yeon looked at but didn't shake. "How refreshingly casual," Ji-yeon said, in a tone that made clear this was not intended as a compliment. Dae-sung mentioned he'd finally replaced the last one. "I'm surprised he went with someone so Unconventional, I contain multitudes, Tanya said cheerfully, entirely unbothered by the obvious slight, which seemed to throw Ji-yeon off more than any defensive response would have. Ji-hoon appeared moments later, his expression shifting to something carefully neutral the moment he spotted his sister. Ji-yeon, I wasn't expecting you. Clearly, Ji-yeon said, her sharp eyes moving between her brother and Tanya with obvious calculation. I just wanted to check on Aryam. And meet the new nanny, apparently, since you didn't think to mention her yourself. There wasn't anything to mention, Ji-hoon said, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. Ji-yeon's gaze lingered on Tanya a moment longer, something sharp and assessing behind her polite smile, before she turned back to Aryam with exaggerated warmth. Well, I won't stay long. I just wanted to remind everyone about the family gathering next week. Mother's expecting full attendance, Dae-sung. No excuses this time. I'll be there, Ji-hoon said tightly. Once Ji-yeon's car had pulled away, Tanya turned to Ji-hoon, curiosity getting the better of her. So that's your sister? Yes, Ji-hoon said, something tired entering his voice. She seems fun, Tanya said diplomatically. Despite himself, Ji-hoon laughed again, shorter this time, but genuine. That's a very generous interpretation. I contain multitudes, Tanya said again. But I also contain the ability to read a room, sir. She was giving major, silently judging everyone energy. Ji-hoon studied her for a long moment, something warm and slightly bewildered in his expression. You really have no idea what kind of household you've walked into, do you? Rich, family drama household? Tanya guessed. I'm getting real reality TV vibes. Very entertaining, low stakes though, right? Ji-hoon opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently deciding, for reasons Tanya couldn't quite parse, that this particular conversation was better left for another day. Low stakes, he said finally, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Sure. Let's go with that. The family gathering arrived a week later, and Tanya, invited along specifically because Aryam had thrown what Miss Sainz Yoon delicately called a diplomatic incident over the idea of attending without her, found herself standing in the foyer of an even larger, even more intimidating mansion, smoothing down the nicest dress she owned and hoping fervently that family gathering didn't mean anything too formal. It meant, as it turned out, extremely formal. Okay, Tanya muttered to Aryam, who was gripping her hand tightly in a small, elegant dress of her own. This is giving royal family Christmas card energy. I did not dress for royal family Christmas card energy. You look nice, Aryam said loyally. Grandmother's going to ask you a lot of questions. She does that. Great, Tanya said. Love a good interrogation. Very normal party activity. Kwon Soo-jin, matriarch of the Kwon family, turned out to be a small, sharp-eyed woman who radiated the particular quiet authority of someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to get exactly what she wanted. She looked Tanya over with unhurried, thorough attention the moment they were introduced. So, Soo-jin said, "You're the nanny my son hired without consulting anyone." Guilty, Tanya said cheerfully, deciding early that the best strategy with this particular audience was total, unbothered honesty. Though in my defense, he seemed pretty capable of making his own hiring decisions. Grown man and everything. Something flickered in Soo-jin's expression surprise, Tanya thought, though she couldn't be entirely sure. And what do you make of this household? Soo-jin asked. Now that you've had 2 weeks to observe it. Honestly, Tanya said, y'all are a lot. Very intense security situation, very dramatic ant energy, very elaborate hide-and-seek games. But Aryam's a sweetheart, and Mr. Kwon's a bit of a workaholic disaster who clearly loves his daughter more than anything, so 10 out of 10 household, minor chaos deductions. The room went very quiet. Several relatives Tanya hadn't been introduced to yet turned to stare, and for one horrifying second, Tanya wondered if she'd just committed some catastrophic social error in front of what was very clearly the most important woman at this entire event. Then Soo-jin laughed a real, surprised, delighted laugh, the kind that immediately made 3 other family members visibly relax. Finally, Soo-jin said, "Someone in this house who speaks plainly." She studied Tanya with something considerably warmer now. You'll do. Across the room, Ji-hoon watched this entire exchange with a mixture of horror and awe, having fully expected his mother's legendary bluntness to send Tanya running for the exits within the first 5 minutes. She likes you, he said, appearing at Tanya's side once Soo-jin had moved off to interrogate someone else. That's not common. I'm very likable, Tanya said. It's a gift. The evening continued in a similar vein, Tanya charming her way through an increasingly bewildering array of relatives, all of whom seemed to carry themselves with the same particular weight and formality Tanya still, somehow, hadn't fully questioned, until she found herself briefly alone with Ji-yeon near the drink table. You're quite comfortable here, Ji-yeon observed, her tone carefully pleasant in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes, for someone who's only been employed 2 weeks. I adjust fast, Tanya said easily. Do you? Ji-yeon said. And has my brother explained to you, in detail, exactly what kind of family you've made yourself comfortable in? Something in her tone made Tanya pause. Import-export, she said slowly. Shipping, Ji-yeon's smile sharpened. Is that what he's calling it these days? What do you mean? Tanya asked, genuine confusion creeping in for the first time since she'd arrived at this house. I mean, Ji-yeon said, leaning in slightly, her voice dropping to something more confidential, that my brother has spent considerable effort ensuring you don't fully understand the nature of his actual business. And I find that fascinating, given how quickly he's grown attached to you. I wonder what he thinks happens when the illusion inevitably breaks. Before Tanya could ask what, exactly, that meant, Ji-hoon appeared, his expression tightening the moment he registered the conversation. Ji-yeon, he said, his voice carrying a warning edge Tanya hadn't heard from him before. Enough, I was simply making conversation with your delightful nanny, Ji-yeon said innocently. We're leaving, Ji-hoon said, turning to Tanya. Something urgent and slightly panicked beneath his composed exterior. Aryam's getting tired anyway. The car ride home was quiet, Aryam asleep against Tanya's side in the back seat, Ji-hoon uncharacteristically silent in the front, glancing back periodically like he was building up to saying something and repeatedly losing his nerve. Mr. Kwon, Tanya said finally. Once they'd pulled into the driveway, what did your sister mean? About the nature of your business? About things breaking? Ji-hoon turned to face her fully, and in the dim light of the car, Tanya saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before, real, genuine anxiety. The particular look of a man about to say something he was certain would change everything. Tanya, he said slowly, I think it's time I told you exactly what kind of household you've actually walked into. And I need you to know, before I do, that I should have told you weeks ago, and I'm sorry I didn't. Tanya felt her stomach drop, 2 weeks of cheerful, oblivious assumptions suddenly, uncomfortably colliding with the growing certainty that she'd badly, catastrophically misread something important. Okay, she said slowly. I'm listening. Ji-hoon took a long breath, glancing back once more at Aryam, still peacefully asleep against Tanya's shoulder, before he finally spoke. I don't run a shipping company, he said. Or rather, I do. But that's not the entirety of it, or even the majority of it, if I'm being fully honest with you. He paused, choosing his next words with visible difficulty. The men in suits. The security protocols. The business associates I asked you to avoid engaging with directly. None of that is standard import-export practice, Tanya. Tanya sat very still, pieces beginning, slowly and with mounting horror, to click into place. The map with the red pins, she said slowly. The phone call about the compromised shipment. The panic room disguised as a reading nook that a 6-year-old described as a completely normal hiding spot for hide-and-seek. Yes, Ji-hoon said carefully. Deok-gu's perimeter checks, Tanya continued, her voice climbing slightly. The 3 men who showed up in 90 seconds, because I hid from the salmon delivery guy in your defense. Ji-hoon interjected. You were following protocol correctly. The threat assessment was simply incorrect. Mr. Kwon. Tanya's voice had gone very flat. Are you telling me I have spent the last 2 weeks working for an actual, real-life mafia boss? Ji-hoon winced slightly at the phrasing, but didn't deny it. That is, an accurate summary, yes. Silence filled the car. Ariam stirred slightly against Tanya's shoulder, murmuring something about stuffed animal rankings before settling back into sleep, blissfully unaware that her nanny was currently undergoing a complete recontextualization of the last 14 days of her life. I thought, Tanya said slowly, that this was just like an extremely paranoid rich family. I thought the security guards were overprotective helicopter parenting. I thought the coded phone calls were boring business jargon. I thought your sister's whole illusion inevitably breaking comment was just, I don't know, weird rich people sibling drama. I understand this is a significant amount to process, Ji-hoon said carefully. I called security on a caterer, Tanya said, her voice rising with something between horror and hysterical laughter. I've been telling Ariam her stuffed animal security detail was cute make-believe, and it turns out she was basically training for real life. Her perimeter checks are real, aren't they? Deok-gu actually checks the windows every night because someone might actually try to break in. Yes, Ji-hoon admitted. Though I should clarify, the threat level has been relatively low the past several months. You haven't been in genuine danger during your time here. Relatively low, Tanya repeated. Relatively, sir. Do you understand how many red flags I explained away as quirky rich people stuff? I thought your family just really loved elaborate security theater for fun. Ji-hoon, despite the genuine tension of the moment, found himself fighting a smile at her escalating disbelief. I should have told you from the beginning, I recognize that. I think, honestly, I was enjoying having someone in this house who treated everything so normally, so without fear, that I kept putting off the conversation that would end that. Tanya stared at him, something in his admission cutting through her spiraling shock. You liked that I didn't know? I liked, Ji-hoon said carefully, that you looked at this entire household, the guards, the protocols, my sister's veiled threats, all of it, and simply decided it was all slightly eccentric rather than genuinely frightening. Nobody has looked at my life that way in longer than I can remember, Tanya. Everyone else who knows the truth treats me differently the moment they learn it. Careful, calculated, afraid, he paused. You called a delivery driver an unauthorized visitor and hid in the pantry with complete conviction. I haven't laughed that hard in years. Tanya sat with that for a long moment, her earlier panic giving way, slowly, to something more complicated. So what happens now? She asked. Now that I know? That depends on you, Ji-hoon said honestly. I understand if this changes how you feel about continuing here. I won't pretend the danger isn't real, even if it's currently low. If you want to leave, I'll ensure you're compensated fully regardless, and I'll understand completely. Tanya considered this seriously, looking down at Ariam, still peacefully asleep, her small hand curled trustingly into the fabric of Tanya's dress. Does she know? Tanya asked quietly. Really know, I mean. Not stuffed animal hierarchy, no. She knows more than I'd like, Ji-hoon admitted. Enough to understand why the precautions exist. Not enough, I hope, to fully understand the danger behind them. I've tried to protect her from the worst of it. Tanya looked at him for a long moment, something settling in her chest despite the enormity of what she'd just learned. I'm not going to lie, she said finally. I need a solid week to process the fact that I've been living in an actual crime drama without realizing it. I need to sit with the fact that Deok-gu's cardigan was hiding a whole secret enforcer identity this entire time. He's actually quite good at his job, Ji-hoon offered. I do not doubt that at all anymore, Tanya said. But, she paused, looking down at Ariam again, then back at Ji-hoon. Something resolute settling into her expression despite the lingering shock. That little girl trusts me. And honestly, somewhere in the middle of thinking this was all elaborate rich people theater, I actually really started loving this weird chaotic household. So, I'm not leaving. But you owe me a much more thorough briefing than don't answer the door. I want the real rules this time. Something in Ji-hoon's exhausted, anxious expression finally, fully relaxed, relief and something warmer moving behind his dark eyes. I can absolutely do that, he said quietly. Thank you, Tanya. Don't thank me yet, Tanya said, though she was fighting a smile now too. I still have several dozen follow-up questions about the panic room, and I need you to know. Right now. that if anyone ever tries to actually hurt that little girl, I will personally fight them with my bare hands, Mafia boss or not. Ji-hoon looked at her, this fierce, fearless, thoroughly unbothered woman, who'd spent 2 weeks mistaking his entire dangerous world for quirky rich people eccentricity, and, upon learning the truth, had responded not with fear but with immediate, fierce loyalty to his daughter, and felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with relief, and everything to do with the growing, terrifying realization that he had absolutely no intention of ever letting this woman leave his household again. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to the house, Tanya now fully briefed on the real rules, and something shifting steadily, unmistakably, between herself and Ji-hoon that neither of them had quite named yet. It showed up in small things. Him coming home earlier than his schedule technically required, finding reasons to linger in the kitchen while Tanya made Aryam's dinner. Her saving him a plate without being asked, teasing him mercilessly about his inability to handle spicy food, while somehow always making sure there was a milder version available for when his eyes started watering. Late evenings after Aryam's bedtime, the two of them talking on the back porch about nothing, about everything. About the particular loneliness of running an empire, and the particular loneliness of being, as Tanya put it, the funny friend everyone loves, but nobody actually asks how she's doing. Then, on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the great reveal, as Tanya had taken to calling it, Deok-gu burst into the kitchen with an urgency that made Tanya's stomach drop instantly. "We have a situation," he said, already reaching for the tablet Tanya had learned, over the past few weeks, always meant something serious. "Sir needs everyone in the security room." Now, Tanya found Ji-hoon already there, jaw tight, staring at a bank of monitors showing footage from the property's perimeter cameras, unfamiliar cars, parked at careful intervals along the street outside. More than could be reasonably explained by coincidence. "What's happening?" Tanya asked, Aryam's hand already gripped tightly in her own, the little girl's earlier playful energy replaced by the same wary stillness Tanya had first noticed the day Ji-yeon visited. "Bayek organization," Ji-hoon said grimly, not looking away from the monitors. "They've been probing our security for the past hour. I don't yet know if this is a genuine move or simply intimidation, but I'm not taking chances, not with Aryam in the house." "What do you need us to do?" Tanya asked, surprising herself with how steady her voice came out. 2 weeks of secretly, quietly absorbing everything Deok-gu had patiently taught her about the household's actual protocols finally proving genuinely useful. "Aryam's safe room," Ji-hoon said. "Now both of you. Deok-gu will secure the door from outside." "The cozy library," Tanya said, already moving, Aryam's small hand tight in hers. "Got it." They reached the hidden room, the panic room Tanya had once genuinely believed was simply an elaborate hide-and-seek spot, and Tanya ushered Aryam inside, the heavy reinforced door sliding shut behind them with a soft, mechanical click that felt, for the first time since Tanya had learned the truth about this household, entirely, terrifyingly real. "Are we going to be okay?" Aryam asked quietly, her earlier bravado about stuffed animal security details entirely absent now, replaced by the genuine small fear of a 6-year-old who understood, on some level, exactly what kind of danger her family actually lived with. Tanya pulled her close, forcing steadiness into her own voice despite the fear pounding through her own chest. "We are going to be completely fine," she said firmly. "Your dad has this handled, baby. He's got Deok-gu and Miss Yoon, and about a dozen very serious men in suits who take their jobs extremely seriously, even when it comes to salmon deliveries." This earned a small, watery laugh from Aryam, exactly as Tanya had hoped. "We're just gonna sit tight in here, and when this is all over, we're gonna make your dad tell us the whole story so we can make fun of him for being dramatic about it, deal?" "Deal," Aryam said, some of the fear easing from her small shoulders. Through the reinforced walls, muffled but audible, Tanya could hear movement throughout the house, urgent voices, quick footsteps, the particular controlled chaos of a household mobilizing for genuine danger rather than a delivery driver mix-up. Her phone buzzed a text from Ji-hoon, sent from somewhere in the house. "Ji-hoon, cars are moving." Possibly nothing. Possibly Chulman testing our response time after word spread about my restructuring. Stay put regardless. I'm handling it. Tanya stared at the message, fear tightening in her chest despite her carefully maintained calm for Ariam's benefit. Tanya, please be careful. She's scared, and honestly, so am I. Come back and tell us this was nothing. There was a long pause before his reply came through. Ji-hoon, I intend to. I have far too much left to explain to you about panic room etiquette to let anything happen to me tonight. Despite everything, despite the genuine fear coiling through her chest, Tanya found herself laughing softly, Ariam looking up at her with confused curiosity. Your dad's trying to be funny at a very inappropriate time, Tanya explained, pulling the little girl closer. Very on brand, honestly. They waited in the reinforced quiet of the safe room for nearly 40 minutes, Tanya keeping Ariam distracted with an increasingly elaborate game involving the room's emergency supplies, before finally, the heavy door slid open to reveal Deok-gu. Looking exhausted, but relieved. It's clear, he said. Sir wants to see you both. He's fine. Everyone's fine. Tanya found Ji-hoon in his office moments later, and the sight of him tie loosened, jacket discarded, but visibly, undeniably unharmed, made something in her chest loosen, so suddenly she nearly stumbled toward him. What happened? She asked, Ariam already running past her to wrap herself around her father's legs. A show of force, Ji-hoon said, one hand resting protectively on Ariam's head while the other reached for Tanya, an instinctive gesture he seemed to register only after he'd already done it. Chulmin's people, testing our response after the recent restructuring. Nothing came of it beyond intimidation, though I won't pretend it wasn't a legitimate concern while it was happening. Tanya let him take her hand, the fear of the past 40 minutes finally, fully draining out of her in a rush that left her slightly unsteady. I need you to understand something, she said quietly, once Ariam had been settled with Miss Yoon for a late, comforting snack, leaving the two of them alone in the office. 2 months ago, I thought your biggest concern was picky eating and screen time limits. Now I'm sitting in a panic room distracting your daughter with granola bar security briefings while actual criminals test your defenses outside. She paused, something raw and honest breaking through her usual easy humor. I'm not scared of the danger, Ji-hoon. Or okay, I am, a little, but I'm more scared of how much I've come to care about both of you in such a short time, and how much tonight terrified me specifically because of that. Ji-hoon studied her for a long moment, something fierce and grateful and entirely unguarded moving behind his tired eyes. I never expected, he said slowly, that hiring a nanny who genuinely, completely misunderstood every single thing about my life would become the person I most wanted beside me when that life finally, actually became dangerous. He reached up, gently touching her face. I don't know how to ask you to stay, knowing what tonight revealed about the real risks. But I know I don't want you to leave Tanya, not out of obligation to Ariam. Though, God knows, she loves you. Because somewhere in the past 2 months, you became someone I can't imagine this house without. Tanya looked at him, exhaustion and fear and something warmer, more certain, settling into her chest. I already told you I wasn't leaving, she said softly. Granola bar briefings and all. But Ji-hoon, if this is going to be real, whatever this is between us, I need you to actually talk to me. No more import-export vagueness. Real conversations, real danger assessments, real everything. I can handle the truth. I just can't handle being kept in the dark about something that could get me or that little girl hurt. Agreed, Ji-hoon said quietly. Completely, he leaned down, and Tanya met him halfway. The kiss soft and uncertain and entirely unlike anything either of them had planned for when this chaotic, hilarious, terrifying job had begun. Neither of them noticed Ariam peeking around the office doorway, having escaped Miss Yoon's snack supervision specifically to check on them. A delighted, knowing grin spreading across her small face before she quietly, deliberately, closed the door to give them privacy already mentally composing, with the confident authority of a 6-year-old. Exactly how she was going to explain to her stuffed animal security detail that the household's newest, most important alliance had just been formed. 6 months later, the household had settled into a new, steadier rhythm. Chalmin's organization fully contained after the standoff, and something between herself and Ji-hoon that had grown from cautious honesty into something neither of them bothered hiding anymore. Ariam's stuffed animal security detail had been formally retired, replaced by what she now called, with great seriousness, the actual team, a title she'd bestowed upon Tanya, Deok-gu and Miss Yoon, complete with a hand-drawn organizational chart that Ji-hoon had, against everyone's better judgment, framed and hung in his office. On a warm Saturday afternoon, the extended Kwan family gathered for a considerably more casual event than the formal dinner months earlier, a birthday celebration for Ariam, held in the estate's garden, complete with a bounce house that Deok-gu had personally, thoroughly inspected for security vulnerabilities before allowing any children inside. "You checked a bounce house for security threats," Tanya said, watching him complete his inspection with genuine bewilderment. "Standard protocol," Deok-gu said seriously, though the corner of his mouth twitched with barely suppressed amusement. So-jin arrived precisely on time, greeting Tanya with the same blunt warmth she'd shown since their first meeting. "You're still here," she observed, watching Tanya expertly redirect a swarm of overexcited children toward the cake table. "Still here," Tanya confirmed. "Turns out I'm surprisingly good in a crisis, once I know what the actual crisis is." "My son tells me you two are." Soo-jin paused delicately. "Figuring it out," Tanya said, glancing over at Ji-hoon, who was currently being instructed by Ariam on the precise, non-negotiable rules of some elaborate party game involving a scavenger hunt. Slowly, but surely. So-jin studied her for a long moment, something approving settling into her sharp features. "Good," she said simply. He needed someone who wouldn't let his world frighten her into silence. Or worse, into using it for her own advantage. She glanced meaningfully toward where Ji-yeon stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the festivities with her usual sharp, assessing expression. Not everyone in this family has managed that particular balance. Ji-yeon approached Tanya later that afternoon, once the cake had been served and Ariam was busy directing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek that bore suspicious resemblance to actual security drills. "You're still here," Ji-yeon said, echoing her mother's earlier observation, though with considerably less warmth. "Getting that a lot today," Tanya said easily. "Guess I'm just hard to scare off." "So I'm learning," Ji-yeon said, something almost respectful entering her carefully neutral tone. "I confess, I expected you to leave the moment you learned the truth. Most people do, eventually, once the novelty of this world wears off and the actual danger becomes real." "I already had my crisis moment," Tanya said. "Panic room, actual criminals testing the perimeter, the whole terrifying ordeal. I came out the other side more committed, not less." She studied Ji-yeon for a moment. "Why do you dislike me so much anyway?" Genuine question. "I've been trying to figure it out for months." Ji-yeon considered the question with more honesty than Tanya expected. "I don't dislike you," she said finally. "I distrust easily, in a world that's given me plenty of reason to." Watching my brother open himself up so completely, so quickly, to someone with no real understanding of the risks, it frightened me. I've watched this family suffer real consequences from misplaced trust before. "Fair," Tanya said. "I get that. But for what it's worth, I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not interested in anything except that little girl's happiness, and your brother's, in whatever order those things overlap. You can keep side-eyeing me as long as you need to. I'll still be here." Something in Ji-yeon's expression shifted, grudging respect breaking through her earlier wariness. "Noted," she said, and walked away without further comment, which Tanya had learned over the months was about as close to an olive branch as Ji-yeon typically offered anyone. As the party wound down, Ariam came running up to Tanya and Ji-hoon, breathless and delighted, clutching a hand-drawn certificate she'd apparently been working on throughout the entire event. "I made this," she announced proudly, presenting it with great ceremony. "It's official. You're both on the actual team now. Permanently, no takebacks." The certificate, drawn in careful crayon, depicted 3 stick figures clearly: Ariam, Tanya, and Ji-hoon, standing beneath a lopsided but enthusiastically rendered rainbow, with the words "The Actual Team, Forever, No Takebacks" printed in Ariam's careful 6-year-old handwriting across the top. Ji-hoon studied the certificate with visible, genuine emotion, something soft and unguarded moving across his usually composed features. "I don't believe there's any protocol for declining a document like this," he said finally, his voice slightly unsteady. "There isn't," Ariam confirmed seriously. "It's binding." "Miss Yoon said so." "Miss Yoon co-signed off on this?" Tanya asked, laughing. "She notarized it." Ariam said, entirely serious, gesturing to a small, official-looking stamp Miss Yoon had apparently applied to the corner of the drawing. Because of course she had. That evening, once Ariam had finally, exhaustedly fallen asleep after her party, Tanya and Ji-hoon sat together on the back porch, the certificate propped carefully against a nearby table. Framed with the same careful reverence Ji-hoon had shown Ariam's earlier organizational chart. 2 months ago, Tanya said, leaning into his side as they watched the sun set over the garden, "I thought I'd accidentally signed up for the most extra-rich people babysitting job in existence." "And now?" Ji-hoon asked. "Now I have an official, notarized position on the actual team," Tanya said. "I've been in a real panic room during a real crisis. I've learned more about international shipping disputes than I ever wanted to know, and somehow, through all of it, I fell in love with the most ridiculous, overprotective, secretly hilarious family I've ever met." Ji-hoon looked at her, something quietly, completely certain settling into his expression. "I fell in love with you somewhere around the salmon incident," he admitted. "I just didn't have the courage to say it until considerably later." "The salmon incident?" Tanya repeated, laughing. "That poor delivery man. We should send him a very nice tip, honestly, given everything that came from that particular misunderstanding." "Consider it done," Ji-hoon said, pulling her closer as the last light faded over the garden, the certificate glowing faintly in the porch light beside them, official, binding and, as far as either of them was concerned, entirely, permanently accurate. If this story had you laughing through the whole salmon incident and then absolutely melting by the end, drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Mine's the notarized certificate, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. Subscribe for more stories that'll make you laugh until you're suddenly, unexpectedly crying. See you in the next one.